For over a century, a massive wall of concrete stood as a silent, immovable barrier in the heart of the Pacific Northwest, slicing a mighty river in two and silencing a biological heartbeat that had pulsed for millennia. This was the Elwha River Dam, a towering monument to early 20th century engineering that provided power to a growing nation but at a devastating cost to the natural world. For 100 years, millions of salmon, the lifeblood of the entire ecosystem, slammed their heads against this concrete wall, unable to reach the pristine mountain headwaters where their ancestors had spawned since the end of the last ice age. An entire evolutionary lineage was halted in its tracks, and the river downstream became a ghost of its former self, deprived of the nutrients and energy that only the salmon could bring. But then, in one of the most ambitious environmental gambles in history, scientists decided to tear it all down. They blew up the concrete, let the river run wild for the first time in a century, and pointed their cameras at the water to see if the salmon would remember a path they hadn't traveled in 100 years. What they filmed happening in the days and months following the dam removal didn't just surprise the scientific community. It completely redefined our understanding of how quickly nature can heal when we simply get out of the way. To truly grasp the magnitude of what happened when that dam came down, you have to understand what the Elwha River used to be. Before the dams were built in the early 1900s, the Elwha was legendary. It was one of the only rivers in the world that hosted all 5 species of Pacific salmon, along with steelhead and bull trout. It was famous for its royal Chinook, massive fish that could weigh over 100 pounds. These fish weren't just animals, they were planetary engineers. Every year, millions of them would swim from the salty depths of the Pacific Ocean back into the freshwater, carrying tons of ocean-derived nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus in their bodies. When they spawned and eventually passed away, these nutrients fertilized the entire forest. The trees along the Elwha grew faster and larger because of the salmon. The bears, eagles, and even the insects thrived on this annual pulse of energy. When the dams went up, that pulse stopped. For a century, the upper 70 miles of the river were cut off. The salmon were trapped in the lower 5 miles, crowded into a tiny fraction of their original habitat. The fish populations plummeted. The legendary 100-pound Chinook became a myth of the past. The gravel beds needed for spawning were washed away and never replaced because the dam blocked the natural flow of sediment. The river became starved. It was a slow-motion collapse of an entire watershed. The decision to remove the Elwha dams, the Elwha Dam and the taller Glines Canyon Dam, wasn't made overnight. It took decades of legal battles, scientific studies, and advocacy by the lower Elwha Klallam tribe, who had lived in harmony with the salmon for thousands of years. Many skeptics argued that the river was too far gone. They claimed the salmon had forgotten the way, or that the millions of tons of sediment trapped behind the dams would choke the river and destroy what little habitat was left. But the scientists moved forward, and in 2011, the largest dam removal project in global history began. As the concrete was chipped away and the reservoirs were slowly drained, something incredible started to happen. The river began to reclaim its old channel. It started moving logs and rocks, carving out the deep pools and riffles that salmon love. But the real test came when the path was finally clear. Scientists stationed cameras underwater and used aerial drones to monitor the newly opened stretches of the river. The big question was, would the fish show up? The answer came almost instantly. Within days of the lower dam being removed, a school of Chinook salmon was spotted swimming past the former dam site. They didn't hesitate. They didn't wander aimlessly. They headed straight upriver, driven by an ancestral GPS that had been dormant for a century. It was as if they had been waiting at the gates for 100 years. Biologists were moved to tears as they watched the first fish leap into the pools of the upper Elwha, reaching cold, clear mountain water that no salmon had touched since the days of the Model T Ford. But the most unbelievable part wasn't just that the fish returned. It was the speed at which the entire ecosystem responded. This is what the cameras captured during the first few years of freedom. As the salmon reached the upper reaches and began to spawn, the nutrient pump was restarted. Scientists began testing the needles of the evergreen trees along the riverbanks. Within just a few seasons, they found chemical signatures of the ocean inside the trees miles above the former dam sites. The forest was literally eating the salmon again. The growth rates of the trees began to tick upward. The cameras also filmed the return of the birds. The American dipper, a small gray bird that flies underwater to eat salmon eggs and larvae, saw its population explode. These birds began to produce more offspring and were healthier than the birds living on dammed tributaries nearby. Why? because they were back on the salmon diet. The salmon weren't just back for themselves, they were feeding the entire world around them. Then there was the sediment. This was the biggest fear of the doubters. Behind the dams, over 30 million tons of silt and sand had accumulated over a century. When the dams were removed, this sediment was released in a massive, muddy pulse. People thought it would be a disaster. Instead, it was a miracle. The river carried that sediment down to the mouth of the Elwha, where it met the Strait of Juan de Fuca. For 100 years, the beaches at the mouth of the river had been eroding away because the dams blocked the sand. As soon as the dams were gone, the river rebuilt the coastline. New estuaries were formed, creating perfect nurseries for young salmon to acclimate to saltwater. Dungeness crabs and shellfish returned to the new sandy flats in numbers that hadn't been seen in generations. The river was literally growing the land back. What the cameras filmed underwater was perhaps the most scientifically significant. Biologists saw that the salmon weren't just using the main river. They were finding the tiny side channels and tributaries. They were colonizing every inch of the newly available territory. They also noticed that the different species were sorting themselves out perfectly. The coho went for the small, woody streams, while the massive chinook stayed in the deeper, faster water. It was a masterclass in niches. The river wasn't just a pipe for water anymore. It was a complex, living mosaic. One of the most surprising discoveries was the return of the sea-run trout, specifically the steelhead. Before the dam removal, there was a population of rainbow trout trapped above the dams. These fish are genetically the same as steelhead, but because they couldn't reach the ocean, they stayed small and lived their whole lives in the mountains. Once the dams were gone, some of these trapped trout headed straight for the sea. They spent a few years in the Pacific, grew into massive, silver steelhead, and returned to the Elwha to spawn. The memory of how to be a sea-run fish had survived in their DNA for 100 years of isolation. This proved a fundamental principle of recent scientific discoveries. Nature doesn't necessarily need us to rebuild things. It has the blueprints stored in the genes of the survivors. The fish hadn't lost their way. They had just been waiting for the door to open. This has completely shifted the way we think about river restoration. Instead of spending millions on complex fish ladders or artificial hatcheries, the most effective thing we can do is unengineer our mistakes. As the years passed, the cameras captured the return of the larger players. Black bears were filmed more frequently along the upper river, patrolling the shallows for spawned-out salmon. Their tracks were found in places they hadn't been seen in decades. The bears would carry the salmon carcasses into the woods, leaving the remains to rot and fertilize the soil, further accelerating the forest's recovery. Even the insects changed. Aquatic insects that rely on the organic matter from salmon began to flourish, providing more food for the young fish. It was a self-reinforcing cycle of life. The Elwha project also provided a unique laboratory for studying river geomorphology. Scientists watched as the river moved thousands of logs, creating log jams that are essential for healthy fish habitat. These jams create deep, cool pools where salmon can rest during their long journey. Before the dam removal, the river was lazy because it had nothing to move. Now it was a dynamic, powerful force, constantly reshaping itself. The cameras showed a river that was alive, not just a channel of water. The cameras also captured the human element of the story. Members of the lower Elwha Klallam tribe were filmed as they conducted their first traditional salmon ceremonies on the upper river in a century. For them, the return of the fish was a spiritual homecoming, the healing of a cultural wound that had lasted for generations. They shared their traditional knowledge with the scientists, helping them understand where the fish used to spawn and how the river had changed. It was a rare and beautiful partnership between ancient wisdom and modern science. As the salmon numbers continue to climb, the Elwha has become a beacon of hope for rivers around the world. Projects are now being planned in the Klamath River in California and across New England, all using the lessons learned on the Elwha. Scientists discovered that the sediment pulse wasn't a catastrophe to be feared, but a necessary reset for the river's health. They learned that the fish are much more resilient and determined than we ever gave them credit for. One of the most interesting things filmed was the behavior of the young salmon, the smolts, as they headed to the ocean for the first time. In the newly formed estuary at the river's mouth, cameras saw thousands of these tiny fish sheltering in the new eelgrass beds. These beds only exist because the dam removal allowed the sediment back in. The estuary acts as a buffer zone, allowing the fish to adjust their physiology from freshwater to saltwater in a safe, food-rich environment. This is the crucial missing link that was absent for 100 years, and its return is why the salmon's survival rates are skyrocketing. The camera footage also revealed a surprising social aspect of the return. Different species of salmon were seen interacting in ways that scientists only previously theorized. They watched as smaller fish followed the larger Chinook, potentially feeding on the eggs that were kicked up during the nest-building process. It was a thriving, bustling underwater city, a contrast to the silent, empty riverbed that existed before 2011. However, the recovery hasn't been without challenges. The sheer amount of sediment made the water very turbid for the first 2 years, making it difficult for some fish to find their way. But even this hostile period was part of the process. The river was cleaning house. Once the initial pulse subsided, the water became clearer and colder than it had been in a century, precisely what the trout and salmon need to thrive. The Elwha River Dam removal taught us that we need to think in watershed scales. You can't just fix one part of a river and expect it to work. You have to look at the whole system, from the mountaintops to the sea. The dams had broken that connection, and removing them was like reconnecting the nerves in a limb that had been paralyzed. Once the connection was back, the body of the river knew exactly what to do. Scientists also used the Elwha to study the impact on the local marine life. Outside the river mouth, in the saltwater, the influx of nutrients and sediment created a boom in the local plankton populations. This in turn attracted more forage fish like herring and sand lance, which are the primary food for the southern resident killer whales. The return of the salmon in the Elwha is a tiny but vital step in saving the orcas of the Pacific Northwest. Everything, from the smallest microbe in the mountains to the largest whale in the ocean, is tied to the movement of these fish. The cameras also documented the greening of the former reservoirs. As the water was drawn down, thousands of acres of muddy lakebed were exposed. Instead of leaving it to be taken over by invasive weeds, a massive replanting effort was launched. Volunteers planted hundreds of thousands of native trees and shrubs. The cameras showed these former dead zones transforming into lush meadows and forests within just a few years. Elk and deer were seen grazing in areas that had been under 100 feet of water for a century. What the scientists found on the Elwha changed the why of conservation. It moved from being about preserving what we have left to restoring what we have lost. It showed that we don't have to accept a diminished world. If we have the courage to remove the barriers we've built, nature has an incredible capacity for a comeback. The results aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They are the silver flashes of salmon jumping in a mountain stream and the sound of a river that has finally found its voice again. The underwater cameras continue to run today, providing a constant stream of data. They are seeing changes in fish size, spawning timing, and even the appearance of rare species that were thought to be extinct in the watershed. The Elwha is now one of the most studied rivers on the planet, a living laboratory that is teaching us how to be better stewards of our Earth. One of the most profound lessons from the Elwha is the importance of geological time. We think in years and decades, but the river and the salmon think in centuries and millennia. The century that the river was dammed was just a blink of an eye to the salmon. Their memory is deeper than our history. This gives us a new perspective on our role in the environment. We are temporary residents, and our structures are often just temporary interruptions to much older and more powerful patterns. As the Chinook numbers hit record highs in the years following the removal, it proved that the Elwha can once again become the salmon factory of the Olympic Peninsula. This has massive benefits for the local economy, from tourism to sustainable fisheries. It shows that environmental restoration and economic health go hand in hand. A healthy river is a productive river. The cameras also captured some unscripted moments of nature. They saw eagles diving into the former reservoir sites to grab fish that were suddenly easier to catch in the shallower water. They saw the river change course overnight during a big storm, a reminder that a wild river is an unpredictable and beautiful thing. This wildness is what was missing for 100 years. A dammed river is a predictable, safe thing, but it's also a dying thing. Freedom brings risk, but it also brings life. The scientists also used DNA barcoding to track the fish. They found that the fish colonizing the upper river weren't just the ones from the local hatchery. They were wild fish from other nearby rivers that smelled the new habitat and moved in. This straying behavior is a natural way for salmon to expand their range and find new homes. It's a biological safety net, that ensures the survival of the species even if one river is destroyed. The Elwha provided a massive new home for the entire region's salmon. Looking at the footage today, it's hard to believe that those massive concrete walls were ever there. The scars on the canyon walls are slowly being covered by moss and ferns. The river has polished the jagged remains of the dam foundations into smooth river stones. Nature is very good at erasing the evidence of our presence once we stop maintaining it. The Elwha is returning to its original state, a wild, cold, salmon-rich paradise. The story of the Elwha is a story of resilience, but it's also a story of cooperation. It required the cooperation of the tribe, the government, the scientists, and the public. It required a shared vision of a better future. It reminds us that big environmental problems aren't solved by one person or one group, but by everyone working together toward a common goal. As the cameras film the next generation of salmon, the grand smolts of the first fish that returned, we are seeing the beginning of a new legend. The 100-pound Chinook may not be back yet, but their descendants are finally growing in the cold mountain water they deserve. The biological clock has been restarted. The heartbeat is back. The discovery on the Elwha changed everything, because it proved that extinction isn't always inevitable, and that damage isn't always permanent. It proved that if we give nature an inch, it will take a mile. Literally, the 70 miles of river that were lost are now found. The millions of salmon that were blocked are now home. For viewers interested in recent scientific discoveries, the Elwha is the ultimate case study. It moved ecological theory into the real world. It turned maybes into watched it happen. It provided the hard data that every other dam removal project around the world is now using to justify its existence. The Elwha hasn't just saved a river, it's saving an entire field of science. As the sun sets over the mouth of the Elwha, you can see the new sandbars glowing in the light. You can hear the water rushing through the canyon where the dams once stood. And if you're lucky, you can see the silver splash of a fish that has traveled thousands of miles to return to the place of its birth. It is a spectacle of nature that was almost lost forever, but it's back, louder and more vibrant than ever. And so, the cameras keep rolling, and the fish keep swimming. The Elwha River is no longer a story of what we took away, but a story of what we gave back. It is a masterpiece of restoration, a symphony of science and nature, and a reminder that the wild is always just waiting for its moment to return. The dams are gone, the river is running, and the salmon are home, and that is the most unbelievable result of all. The scientific lessons continue to pile up. Researchers are finding that the return of the fish has even changed the behavior of the local songbirds and the types of vegetation that thrive in the estuary. The cascade of benefits is so vast that we are still trying to map it all out. It's like a puzzle where every piece you find makes the picture more beautiful. What the cameras filmed on the Elwha is more than just biology. It's a message to the future. It says that we have the power to fix what we've broken. It says that we don't have to be the generation that just watches the world decline. We can be the ones who bring it back. The Elwha is our proof. It's our inspiration. It's our wild, running, salmon-filled future. The story is far from over. The salmon populations will take decades to reach their full potential, and the forest will take centuries to fully mature. But the foundation is there. The plug has been pulled, and the life is flowing back in. The Elwha River is a living testament to the power of freedom, the resilience of nature, and the incredible, baffling things that happen when we let a river be a river again. So the next time you see a dam, don't just see a wall, see a potential restoration. See a sleeping river. And remember the Elwha, where they released the water, filmed the return, and watched a million-person-strong legacy of salmon reclaim their kingdom. It truly is one of the most remarkable scientific discoveries of our age, and it's a story that is still being written, one splash at a time. The cameras are still there, the fish are still jumping, and the river is still running wild. This is the Elwha. This is the future of our oceans and our mountains. This is what happens when we let nature win. And it is, quite simply, unbelievable. Thank you for being part of this deep dive into the restoration of the Elwha River. The story of the dams and the salmon is a powerful reminder that the natural world is not a static thing to be controlled, but a dynamic force to be respected. As we continue to explore the recent scientific discoveries that are shaping our understanding of the planet, let the Elwha be a guide for what is possible when we work with the grain of nature instead of against it. Keep your eyes on the water, keep your hearts in the wild, and never stop questioning the barriers we put in the way of life. The salmon of the Elwha are back, and they are telling us that the world is ready for a comeback. All we have to do is listen to the river. Until next time, stay curious, stay hopeful, and keep exploring the amazing secrets of our changing world. The silver flashes in the water are more than just fish. They are symbols of a new relationship between humans and the earth, a relationship based on restoration instead of extraction. A relationship that ensures that the Royal Chinook will once again be a reality, not just a myth. The Elwha is free, and in its freedom, we have found a new way forward. So let the water flow, let the sediment build, and let the salmon spawn. The story of the Elwha is the story of our planet healing itself, with a little bit of help from us. It is a beautiful, loud, and incredibly splashing success. And it's only the beginning. The world's rivers are waiting, and the Elwha has shown them the way home. The cameras on the Elwha will be there for years to come, and we'll be there to watch, because some things are too beautiful and too important to miss. The million salmon are home, the dams are gone, and the river is forever changed. And that is exactly how it should be.